learning how to think laterally, learning how to brainstorm, learning, and especially learning that sometimes you need to come up with 10 decent ideas to come up with one really great one. That's the other piece. A lot of people think, it's funny, they think, anyone in a creative or an expressive or performative art, they have some, natural talent, a reflex that just kicks in. Well, no, actually, that comes from having tried lots of stuff and having failed lots of times and having paid attention to what worked. And, just like you would build 5 minutes of comedy, eventually you find those few things that really work and you build on them.
You hear all the bull about marketing every day. Make your money in your sleep. My new offer is crushing it. My guru could beat up your guru. It's time to go right to the source and get the truth about marketing. With your host, the founder of copychief.com, Kevin Rogers.
Hey, welcome back. Another hot one today. My guest is David Garfinkel, Garf, as we affectionately call him, in our secret group that I'm not allowed to tell you about.
Shh. Yeah, don't tell him.
Don't tell him about the secret group. Garf is a legend in our industry. Just to really pile on the pressure here, Garf. But I think that word certainly applies. You are known as the world's greatest copywriting coach. I've never heard that title disputed. As a copywriting coach myself, I gladly point out your crown for that title. You're a best-selling author of a book that you released about a year ago called Breakthrough Copywriting, and interestingly did zero promotion on, which is cool. So get to kind of like break this to the listeners if they don't know about that book. Also, one of my favorites, Advertising Headlines That Make You Rich, sits on my shelf as one of my must-have, go-to, in arm's length books when I'm writing. And along with myself, Garf is on the faculty of John Carlton's Platinum Mastermind Group. So fortunately for me, I get to see David 2 or 3 times a year and hear all his wisdom in a very closed-door setting. So, David, thanks so much for being here, man.
Oh, you're welcome. The only thing I'd ask is when you say legend, please put the word living in front of it,
Is that must be the thing, right? It's like I never thought about that. If I should be so fortunate someday to be called a legend, that'd probably be my first thought. Is like, am I dead?
An obituary or something? Yeah. No, thank you. I appreciate it, really.
It's funny. Well, yeah, like I said, man, I'm privileged to your wisdom, and I leave with a much richer brain at every encounter. So this will be great. I want to start talking about something more recently in your life. You had to give a really important talk not long ago, and you wanted to have some humor in the talk. And so you went out and you hired a professional comedy coach. Do you mind talking about that particular talk and the experience of working with a coach on your comedy?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there was a lot of pressure on this talk, and in addition to that, it was particularly difficult for me to find humor in the situation because it was my mother's memorial service. After she had died, we gathered all of her friends and other people who'd been in her congregation at a meeting place, and I was sort of emceeing is a really bad word to use, but that's what I was doing. And you might think, why in the world would you want to be funny at a memorial service? But the fact is, my mother, she was a funny person, and I've never known anyone to plan their own death so far in advance. Literally, we came up with the epitaph for her headstone, and the first word was humorous. So I thought it would be, dishonest and incongruent not to be humorous. Well, when I first started working on the humor part of the talk, and I had plenty of serious things to say too, because, I really worshipped her in the moments I wasn't, griping. it was really falling flat. I was in a local mastermind group, and these guys, one of them said, "David, I don't know how to tell you this, but you need a coach for this. This is really terrible." And they were right. I mean, I think I have a good sense of humor, but it's a little hard. So I found a guy. He actually has the words comedy coach trademarked, registered trademark.
Wow.
And he's in San Francisco, about 15, 20 minutes. And we just started working on it. He gave me this really challenging assignment. In fact, I want to give you props for being phone support in this, because I was, pardon this, dying myself. Going through every day, I would write an hour of comedy, and I didn't have any idea where I was going or how I was doing it. But, like anything else, you get into the rhythm of it. And it works. And this guy was great. He was really great, because he would go over my stuff. He would tell me what was good and why and what sucked. And, you need that kind of honesty. There was, I don't want to get into all of the family dirty laundry, but there was a lot of tension about certain aspects of the previous 4 years of my mother's life. And so I had a couple of jobs. I wanted to sort of keep it light and celebrate her spirit. And I had to, keep from riots breaking out in the audience, because some people were sort of mad about certain things. And it worked. It worked. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life, and one of the scariest ones too. What I learned is, Dan Kennedy has this great quote. He says, "Quantity before quality." You just start generating a lot of stuff. A lot of it's crap. You throw the crap away or flush it down the toilet, or whatever metaphor you want to use. And eventually you get better. And, anyway, it was a lot of fun. I have a very smart ass friend who's a real culture vulture who is, one of my supporters there. And he said, "David, that was as good as any off Broadway show I've ever seen."
That's great. Wow. Well, you know what? It's interesting. And you said you don't know why in the world would somebody want to be funny, but I have that same sort of strange instinct. And for me, you might go, well, of course that makes sense. You were a stand-up comic, but like this is almost bizarre, but I kind of fantasize about giving eulogies, and I'm thinking of people that who might be in their latter years, and I'm kind of like writing bits like all along, and I'm like trying to get stories out of them, because I think that's the greatest way that you can honor somebody, right? If you can hopefully come into that moment. And get everybody laughing about their memories. It's just such a release, and it is a great calling. It is a lot of pressure, because the funny thing is, David, like you were the only one who knew you wanted it to be funny, right?
Right.
Like
right.
nobody in the
No.
audience was expecting at all to laugh or anything. So, in some ways, you like I said, you couldn't fail, because if you got one laugh, it was a bonus, but you definitely could fail by trying too hard and having the jokes miss the mark, right? It could have been seen in poor taste.
Oh yeah. It could have gone really south if I billed it as a comedy show. Oh man,
A wacky memorial. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that with us. And I know it went extremely well, and it was a big accomplishment for you, and a beautiful way to honor your mother. Let's talk about the art of coaching copywriters. One other thing you and I have in common is that we're two guys foolish enough to welcome this task. Most of our colleagues, I don't think I'm speaking out of school here, to tell us we're crazy, and that they just don't want to deal with all the head trash that comes along with helping somebody develop as a writer, right?
Yeah.
What is the qualification you look for? Because it's not like you're just out there, open door, hey, come on in and start coaching with David. It's very high priced, and it's very hard to get on your calendar. What do you look for when somebody applies for you to go, I can help this person?
Well, great question. First of all, my hat's off to you, Kev, because I think you're willing to work with people who are beginners or who are just getting started. I'm not. And you might think that's out of arrogance or something. No, it's because I fail miserably. I just don't have the patience to get someone from 0 to 10 miles an hour. They've got to be going at least 10 miles an hour. Otherwise, I've just found repeatedly I can't help them. I don't know why, but I can't. So the first qualification is that they're actually doing it and they're making money, or they have their own money on the line if they're a business owner or a infopreneur. So I mean that's like the first thing. The second thing is and boy, this is a hard one for a lot of writers to hear, maybe. Salesmanship, saleswomanship, or the ability to sell or the desire to sell, feeling positive about selling is more important than writing skill. Now, you can't have someone who's totally illiterate or is totally tone deaf to words. That's for sure. But I mean, the same thing is true not only in copywriting, but actually, actually in a new book I'm reading about storytelling, about fiction writing, which says that there are these beautiful writers, but they don't have a good story. And so, they'll get all these great reviews in the New York Times Review of Books and the New Yorker and wherever else. But, lots of people don't like their books. And the counterexample, which is, kind of crass and controversial, is 50 Shades of Grey, which most literary critics agree is terrible writing. And yet 100 million copies were sold because it's good storytelling. So if you take the idea of storytelling and you move that over into selling and salesmanship, that's true. I was just talking with someone we both know yesterday, Jim Clare, who came out of the car business. He was a car salesman. His dad owned a lot of car dealerships, and he was a good writer, and he's still a good writer, but it was the salesmanship that was his engine, that was his driving force. Sorry about those bad choices of words for car. My mind.
We'll talk about alliteration or punnery later, because that's an important topic for us. But go ahead.
Yeah, but I guess really, excuse me, I guess the key thing is commitment and engagement. Copywriting is not something you do from afar. It's not an intellectual exercise. It's you're all in. And when someone wants to do it, when they have that itch, when they know, and they're not sort of ambivalent about it, they know they want to do it, and they've been doing it for a while. Because let's face it, it's like any other art form or performance or craft. There's going to be good days and bad days. And maybe one of the reasons I want someone who's been in it a little while is they've been through a bad day and they still know they want to do it.
Yeah.
And I imagine there are other forms like maybe acting or music and maybe comedy where the bad days are a lot worse than they are in copywriting. But still, it can be emotionally rough. So that's a quality I look for, is resilience. Lately, I've started asking people if they've had musical or athletic training. I don't particularly care if they can carry a tune or if they're coordinated. What I want to know is, can they stick with the discipline of practice and the consistency of learning a method through repetition, which is, especially for a creative person, not necessarily the most fun thing to do, but absolutely necessary.
Great answers, man. Really interesting. Yeah, so true about resilience. How do you coach somebody if they're, like you said, they're not a newbie? So that's sort of the key, is that they got to have stuff out there, right? And they got to be, it's not just, hey, Garf said this looked pretty good, I guess we're okay, let's go put money behind it. You're guiding their copy, but they're testing it out on the marketplace and letting the only judge and jury that matters tell the tale.
Yeah, great question. So, well, there's really two parts to the question, the way I hear it. One is, how do you coach them? And one is, how do you evaluate the copy? They're two different things, but they're very interrelated. But to get to your question first, a lot of it is common sense that's exceptionally hard to have until you've had a lot of experience. By that I mean, you need to have a few things in alignment, just sort of like, cylinders in a combination lock. You need to really know who your market is and what they're feeling, what they're thinking, what's a pain or a desire that they are intensely, consciously aware of. Excuse me. And so if I'll go through a quick check just to make sure they know who their market is and what they want and what the conversation is at top of mind, the old Robert Collier thing of the conversation already going on in a prospect's mind. Mm-hmm. Another thing, and our friend Carlton has said, and sorry, I don't know what I ate. Carlton said it's the hardest thing, and he may be right. Probably is right. Is it conversational?
Yeah.
I have a friend, old friend. He's made millions of dollars as a marketing consultant, not in direct marketing, in another area of marketing for entrepreneurs. And I don't want to embarrass him, so I'll make something up to make this totally unidentifiable for him. We'll call it the Gee Whiz Bang marketing. He was doing a launch on Gee Whiz Bang marketing. And his headline was the Gee Whiz Bang marketing program. And he had that phrase 3 times in the first 20 words. And, I shook him by the lapels. It was over the phone, so it was sort of, virtual. But I said, come on, you got a prospect who needs this, who's going to die if they don't get it, who can afford it, but it's about all they can afford. And you're sitting down with them at a Starbucks. Do you start your conversation by saying, Mildred, Gee Whiz Bang marketing? Yes, Gee Whiz Bang marketing today. So he writes back, thanks for the ass kicking. Well, I wasn't trying to kick his ass. I was just trying to shake him up like you shake a baby or something. I don't know.
Like you shake a baby. Proof that you're not a father right there, that you would use that
analogy. That's right. I'm not. And you can see why.
Anymore, at least. No, I kid. It's terrible. That's so funny. Yeah, well, it's almost like some people are writing for SEO or some crazy thing, right? It's like, why would you? Yeah. And to us, I love this topic because one thing Carlton has really taught me is, and this was always my instinct as a writer as well, that you don't even use the same verb in an entire sales letter if you can avoid it, right? Mm-hmm. Or certainly not in the same section or page. And look, there's a lot of good words out there, and if your thesaurus is not well thumbed and dog-eared, you're not doing your job. And so
and one of my clients in and not the copywriting industry showed me an article lander yesterday which points to some recent research in an entirely different field. But it explains why you don't want to use a different verb. It says that people find novelty interesting, fascinating. I mean, if you're going to get somebody who's going to be an air traffic controller, you don't want a guy who's going to have a little fun by having the planes do loop-de-loops before they land. But you want someone who's consistent, a little boring and does well under extreme continuous stress. But in writing, in communication, you want to have as many different words, as long as the words, again, are
clear,
natural, and conversational.
Yeah,
and clear. But because it increases. I mean, the hardest thing we as copywriters have to do is keep a person interested in reading it. You know,
Yeah.
a guy I worked with once, right around the time of the dot bomb, you know, about 16, 17 years ago, he was working with all these young liberal arts grads in these ridiculous companies that were about to crash and burn and cause a lot of financial loss. But they didn't really want to be there. Of course, they all wanted to be in Hollywood writing screenplays or at home writing novels, but they just happened to get a job writing copy. And he said, the first thing he said to them, sort of like Professor Kingsfield in The Paper Chase, you know, the first thing he says is, your brains are mush. I'm going to teach you how to think like lawyers. First thing he said to them was, nobody wants to read what we write, which for a writer is, you know, a terrible realization at the beginning, but actually very valuable. And so you want to do everything you can to keep them on the page, to keep them watching the VSL, to keep them on the web page, whatever. And certainly keeping it interesting, having, you know, realistic variety in there. I mean, you know, there are two sides to what Carlton said, and he's not talking about this. So I'm not blaming him, but you look at someone, a great novelist like Elmore Leonard, and if he says he said at all, that's it. But he's not going to say he said, he exclaimed, he declaimed,
right.
You know. So there are times where using the same verb works because you want to get it out of the way, but yeah, Carlton's right. I mean, when you know, especially since copy needs to be active, you need to use active verbs that are not only active as opposed to, you know, verbs like he understood as opposed to it was understood. You know, someone did something, but you want to create pictures of motion to get the person ready to take that ultimate motion, which is to take out their credit card and punch it into the order form.
Absolutely. Yeah, great. I think to defend my own bad quoting of John, I think he was talking primarily about action verbs, you know, and that sort of thing. But it's you know, I'll tell you what, that is a great, you and I could spend hours on the minutia of writing, but that is a huge one. Like just when simple will do, like you said about, first of all, I think people should use more dialogue in their copy. It really draws people in. But yeah, avoid the idea of saying, he exclaimed, he said with a shocked look across his face. Forget all that. He said, she said, because the idea is to let the dialogue be the focus, not the verbs around the dialogue or the adjectives. And so, yeah, that's great. Good stuff. Okay, let's talk about headlines a little bit. You brought up one of your clients, and again, you work with not only with copywriters, but you consult with major corporations and small business owners who are highly productive. You're a lot of people's secret weapon. But I want to focus on headlines because, again, you literally wrote the book on on headlines, advertising headlines that make you rich, which you can find on Kindle. Kindle or at least on Amazon.
That book has a hard copy. In fact, my publisher has asked me to revise it for a paperback edition we're coming out with. So that's a traditional book in a sense.
Yeah, I own the hardback. So okay, cool. But you also are somebody who, you know, a lot of people talk about Weekly World News and Daily News and National Enquirer for their headline writing prowess, but you're somebody who really studies this. I know that you read these magazines weekly, and you learn a lot from these headlines. You constantly marvel at them. So tell us a little bit about what we're probably not seeing when we see those sort of big, boisterous, shocking style headlines.
Okay, well, one thing is the fine balance between surprise and believability. You know, a headline needs to shock you a little bit, but it doesn't need to be so. It needs not to be so far over the top that no one can believe it. There's I think the famous. Weekly World News is no longer around, but for people who don't know the tabloids, like the National Enquirer is at the top of the food chain, the Weekly World News was at the bottom. There was a headline that went, "Man eats own head."
Yeah.
Well, first of all, that's physically impossible unless he's able to literally turn his head inside out and then somehow force it down his esophagus. But secondly, it's hard to believe that,
Yeah.
if they're literally talking about the appendage right above the neck. So, headlines have to be, you have to push it as far as you can, but not over the line. And the line is, someone needs to look at it and say, that's possible, but I'd sure like to know how.
Yeah.
So that's like the surprise, and the other side is believable. Another thing that's really important, and you don't see it in all headlines, but I think you see it in some of the best headlines, is conflict. Now, in comedy, in theater, in fiction, in film, conflict is what drives a story forward. Conflict is what grabs people, because when you have the right kind of conflict, it creates curiosity, but it creates curiosity in a way that matters. Like, I think Gene Schwartz had something for an Asian weight loss secret. It says literally burns fat off your body. Now, this was a long time ago when you didn't see all of these weight loss pills everywhere you turned on the internet. There was no internet when he did this. Mm-hmm. That's like, unless you're talking about a blowtorch, what in the hell could burn fat off your body? So it's sort of a conflict, maybe a conflict with reality. Maybe Gary Bencivenga had a great headline, "Get Rich Slowly." Mm-hmm. It's a conflict because everybody wants to get rich right away, and he's saying, no, get rich slowly. And, well, hey, if you look at how Warren Buffett became the richest man in the world, that happens to be how he did it, slowly, relatively. He did it in one lifetime, but he didn't do it in 1 year.
Right.
So there's conflict, there's surprise. One of the things about headlines people need to be careful about is curiosity. Curiosity is important, but if it's not going to stoke curiosity in the direction of the problem your offer is ultimately going to promise to solve, or the desire your offer is ultimately going to promise to help somebody get, it's counterproductive and it doesn't work. So you have to line up a lot of things, but I think maybe the best thing about headlines, people often forget this, is what Gene Schwartz said, and he said the purpose of the headline is to get them to read the first sentence, and the purpose of the first sentence is to get them to read the second sentence. But what I'd like to add to that is in the right frame of mind, in the frame of mind of expectation, or maybe a little desperation that they're having a problem they can't solve, or, excessive desire for something they lust after that they can't figure out how they're going to get. So yeah, you want to keep them reading, but, the context in which they're reading, the direction in which their expectations, their hopes are pointed, and you want to know that, and you want to include that thinking into this very few short set of words. That's a headline. It's important. So it's one of those things where a good headline could look sort of simple until you've actually tried to write one and make it work, and then you realize there are all of these factors. Surprise, conflict, believability, focusing on getting someone to want and buy the offer. All those things.
Awesome. Wow. What a masterclass on headlines right there. Thank you for that. Okay. Well, I hate to say our time is coming due here, because I could go on for forever with you, and hopefully we can perhaps do a part 2 someday if you'd be so generous.
Yeah, I think so.
So for now, but let's get to the big essential question. Now, again, you've been at this quite a while, David. You've been in the trenches in all kinds of industries, and now you're a sought-after consultant and copywriting coach. So, David Garfinkel, what is the one thing you've done in your marketing that has produced the most surprising results?
Okay, that's a great question, and this sort of happened by accident. I was at Mark Ling's dating mastermind, it was called. It wasn't really a mastermind. It was more like a conference or a seminar.
You mean for the dating niche?
Yeah,
not that everybody there was looking to get laid.
Well, that's another story for another time, Kev. But these were people who, both men and women, who write dating offers, and some of them doing multi-millions of dollars of sales a year of info products. And I was giving a talk. I actually printed out the slides. I was talking about two things. I was talking about hooks, which is, essentially headlines, but maybe more than a headline. It's, the whole concept, the words right after the headline, the image you might use, and proof, which I think are the most high leverage, most important things that people have the most difficulty with. And I don't know what came over me. I don't even remember how this happened, but I offered to brainstorm hooks for people right there on the spot.
Wow.
And I mean, talk about pressure. I mean, my mom's memorial service was easy compared to that. Well, in some ways it was harder emotionally, but
moment for moment, a lot more pressure in that. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And, the stars aligned. Mercury was not retrograde that day, I guess. I don't know how this all happened, but I kept hitting them out of the park. And I remember this one thing, and as a experienced professional stand-up, you'll appreciate this. There's this one woman who's sort of known for putting the turd in the punch bowl wherever she goes, and so another woman was describing her prospect to me, and I was trying to brainstorm a hook for her, and the woman said some sort of unclear words. I said, so what you're saying, if I understand you correctly, is that the women who are on your list believe without a man, I'm nothing. Is that right? And before she had a chance to answer, Ms. Punchbowl Turd starts bellowing at me, "That's wrong!" And I'm not a lawyer. I've never been a judge, but I looked at her and I said her name, and I said, "This is not a courtroom, and you're dismissed."
You're booty hecklers.
And the weird thing is, she came up to me later and told me how masculine she thought that was, what I did.
Wow.
I mean, all kinds of people. Yeah. But anyway, this as a but I digress. This, as a marketing technique, one guy, great guy, I don't want to mention names just because it's really private, but one guy wanted to have a conversation with me afterwards. Neither of us was drinking, but we sat down at slot machines and drank a bottle of water and just talked for 5 hours. And at the end of 5 hours, said, "David, I'm going to send you a check for $30,000 on Monday.
Wow.
I want you to coach me." And he did. And I got well over six figures of business out of that. I did think of another thing that has only gotten me one piece of business, but it's sort of weird, sort of interesting. I can tell you much quicker if you want to hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd love to write book reviews. I'd never done it for a living. Actually, I wrote one book review that got picked up by the New York Times News Service when the New York Times was on strike. So I'm a scab writer for the New York Times. But I wrote it for the Washington Star, and they needed content. But I'm not a professional book reviewer. But when I see a book on Amazon, I'll never trash a book. If I don't like it, I'll just keep my mouth shut. But there was a book by a guy named Dan Pink, who I know. and it was called "To Sell Is Human." And I didn't check today, but recently, like a few weeks ago, I had the number one. I had more likes on my review than anything else. And one guy at a consulting firm read my review and called me up and hired me to consult on some copy based on the review. Weird, huh?
Wow.
Never would have thought that happened.
That's amazing. So you just never know where your stuff's going to be picked up. And if as long as you, and then take chances, right? I love that story. I mean, that is one of the bravest things you could do, because like you said, so many things could go wrong when you're on the spot, essentially improving hooks.
Well, you know something, Ken, I want to say something, and this is for all of the people listening who someday are going to be doing what you've done and what I've done to a lesser degree, which is speaking in public. Mm-hmm. You're not exactly right when you say something could go wrong. Something always goes wrong. I realized that for the first time when our friend Brian McLeod and I were doing this seminar out in San Francisco called High Speed Copywriting, and somehow I passed through a portal. I went through the magic turnstile Neil Young talked about, because it wasn't necessarily a good one. Ever since then, no matter where I go, whenever I'm about to give a talk, something screws up. And as I look backwards, half the time something screws up. And, a friend of mine is doing this very high pressure consulting in Cincinnati, where she does a lot of speaking, a lot of coaching. And she said, first day it was 90 degrees, 98% humidity, and the power goes out and she has to talk to everybody. And I said, of course, because, you need to be ready for that to happen. This was a lot. This is truly tempting fate. And I think if I'm a cat, I definitely burned one of my 9 lives on that one.
Yeah, that's where you sweat in a cool room right there on that one. But
air conditioning was working fine. I was sweating like a pig. Too bad.
I love it. I'm going to ask one quick follow-up to that, and this would be helpful to anyone listening, because hooks is such a vague and mysterious notion sometimes. So what's the minimal amount of information you would need from somebody to brainstorm a hook for them?
The minimum information I would need is, who is their prospect? What is the worst or most painful problem that the prospect is aware of that they can solve with their offer? And what is their offer, and what's unique and more valuable about it? If I could get those 4 pieces of information, I could start. I'd probably need more, but I think with that information, and also, learning how to think laterally, learning how to brainstorm, and especially learning that sometimes you need to come up with 10 decent ideas to come up with one really great one. That's the other piece. A lot of people think, it's funny, they think, anyone in a creative or an expressive or performative art, they have some, natural talent, a reflex that just kicks in. Well, no, actually, that comes from having tried lots of stuff and having failed lots of times and having paid attention to what worked. And, just like you would build 5 minutes of comedy, eventually you find those few things that really work and you build on them.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Those 4 things you gave, man, that's a big takeaway if you're listening to this and you've ever been stymied by trying to come up with the unique hook of your product. If you don't understand your prospect and you don't understand their problem, if you're not clear on your offer, and most importantly, if you have not thought through how your offer uniquely solves their problem, it is not time to write a hook. In fact, it's, I would say, impossible to write a compelling hook. So that alone, man, David, as I knew you would, you've just given us a masterclass on several topics today: headlines, even comedy, public speaking, and hooks, which I did not expect. So thanks for all this, and like I said, I hope we can do it again. Oh
yeah, I'd love to. And I'd just like to humbly say that without your great questions, and rapport, I couldn't have done it. So there you go.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. Garfinkelcoaching.com is where you want to go if you think you could qualify for David. And follow him wherever you can. You will not find him, I can tell you, on Facebook. I won't even ask him to reply to that word. So,
well,
thanks.
I'm just going to say that may change.
Oh, really? Get out! No way.
That's all I'm going to say.
Oh my God!
Last time I told you something's going to happen in the next 90 days. Now I'm going to say that may change.
Oh, that would be big. Okay. All right. So I'll take it back. You may find David on Facebook someday.
That works. Yeah.
All right. Thanks again. We'll talk soon.
You're welcome. Thanks, Kev. Bye.
Hey, thanks again for listening to the Truth About Marketing podcast. If you like this show and you think other people would like this show, the best way to spread the word is by reviewing and rating the show in iTunes. Just log in, click review, leave a big old fat 5-star review, and let everybody know that you dig the show so that they can dig it too. To get all the links and resources we mentioned on today's episode, please go to copychief.com/TAM, as in Truth About Marketing. And if you'd like to learn more about how you can improve your sales copy with templates, formulas, coaching, feedback, or hiring a pro, do all that on the inside of the members area of copychief.com, and I will look for you there. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.